Hello there. Welcome back to Daddy Rolled a One. I'm Martin, and this is going to be part of a new series that I'm doing on how I plan for a campaign. And then individual future episodes in the series will also talk about like individual sessions, like how I prep for that session based on what my players told me that they wanted to do at the previous session. So just really quickly, for those who come to my channel mainly for my D&D history videos, never fear, I'm going to keep making those. I've got a couple more in the queue ready to go. But I wanted to kind of mix things up a little bit and start talking a little bit about why I use those historical games. So this campaign that I'm running is using an older version of the game. So there'll still be a lot of history in there as I talk about some of the rules and the differences in that particular version of the game. So this game is based on a campaign that I'm running for my daughter and her friends. They were tweens when the campaign started about 3 years ago. They're all about 13 or 14 now. And there is one dad player in the group. And I do want to say that this advice is pretty much going to be applicable to anybody, no matter what age range of players that you have. So I don't really change my game that much. Based on the age of the players. These kids were about the age that I was. I was 11 when I started playing the game. And, I don't really think it's necessary so much for that age range to change things too much. I tone things down a little bit. But really the advice of like how to prep for a session is going to be applicable, like I said, to anybody, especially if you have a group of new players that you haven't played with before. I'd also like to ask people, please share in the comments, share your advice, your tips, your suggestions for starting a new campaign, getting a group together, and some of the decisions that you make. And let's use this community that we've developed here to help each other and share our ideas and experience with each other. While I'm at it, if you're going to comment, if you could please go ahead and just like and subscribe to my channel, I would super appreciate it. Subscriptions are really crucial to small channels like me because it helps the YouTube algorithm know to recommend my content to other people. And then if you could also please share it, I would appreciate that. Share it on your social media channels and drive other people to my channel. All right. So with that, let's talk about why I wanted to start running this campaign for my daughter. Well, it's my daughter. I started talking to her when she was about in second grade, about 3 years before we started this campaign. And I've been running a long-term D&D campaign, a 3.5 / Pathfinder game that started in May of 2001. And so she used to see my friends come over to the house to play. And so I'd started asking her like, hey, is this something that might interest you? And she said yes. But unfortunately, I just kind of procrastinated a little too long. So it was literally like 3 or 4 years later, right during the start of the pandemic lockdowns, March of 2020, she was in 5th grade and, no more, going to school. She's at home. She lost all of her structure. All kids did. And I could see it was having a huge effect on her mental health. She was getting depressed. She wasn't getting up on time. She wasn't dressing for class. She was being in her PJs because she didn't need to be dressed. She could just turn the camera off and be in class. The teachers kind of stopped grading some of the homework because they got used to teaching online and figuring out the equipment there. And then all of her regular activities that were scheduled, going to ballet after school, she'd been doing that since she was like 2 years old, that was gone. And all the other activities that we used to do together and seeing her friends. And I thought like, okay, I need to step in here and help her. She's an only child. She doesn't have any other kid interaction during this time. And so I wanted to do something to help her with that, but also something that as she was getting older, that I would have a connection with her as she was starting to develop her own sense of the kind of music she listened to or things that she was into, like makeup and fashion, things that I really don't have a context to kind of talk with her about. And so, and then meanwhile, she was also kind of losing things that we did used to have in common. Like she used to go with me to the comic book store every week. And of course, the comic book store wasn't open during the pandemic lockdowns, but now that it's reopened again, like that's not something that's come back. She's kind of drifted away from that, unfortunately. So I was looking for something new that as she's getting older, that years later, she can look back on and understand that I'm doing this for her to have time. That's something that she and I have in common together. So it benefits me as well because I love playing D&D. And so that just kind of worked out. So so the first thing I did, she said, yes, I'm interested in playing. And so I said, okay, let's give me a list of your friends. And so she spent a lot of time thinking about this. And it's just interesting seeing this thought process of figuring out the group of friends that she thought would be the right group for this D&D game, because they don't all go to the same school. So one of them she knew from her school at the current time. One of them was someone that she'd known since preschool and from Girl Scouts, but they didn't go to the same school anymore. And then one of them was someone that she knew from ballet in her very early years of elementary school, but that girl then switched to a different school. So none of these girls outside of being with my daughter hung out together. And so there was some thought process of like, is this group going to gel? Are they going to work? Because they're all friends of my daughter's, but she wanted to make sure that they were going to get along with each other. So and I think we can all relate to that. That's something that everybody goes through. And if you have tips for how to work with a group to help it gel, please share them below. So then I knew I needed to get the parental buy-in from these players. So these are going to be people that we were going to be expecting to be on a call or eventually, hopefully in person, playing a game and with adults, right? So I'm an adult player and I wanted to make sure the parents understood that, like, you know, I was going to be part of this and that they were comfortable with it. And I knew some of the parents better than others. And I also knew some of the parents had some negative perceptions about D&D. Some of them thought it was kind of like nerdy, and they weren't sure they wanted their daughter associated with that. So I wrote a pretty lengthy email, but I kind of talked about my history with the game, how it helped me as a kid, and how it would help their daughters with things like math and percentages and probabilities and statistics, and also group and individual problem solving and creative thinking on your feet, improv, public speaking, all these different things that you get as benefits from playing D&D. And so I said, you know, but this is going to be a commitment if they, unless they don't like it, but if they do like it, this is something that's going to be ongoing. So just know that getting into this, like this, it's not a one and done type of thing. That's not what I was looking for. It's going to be an ongoing series of games called a campaign. I had to explain that term. So I got really positive feedback from these parents that appreciated this email that I sent, and then it helped them understand better the context of what we were asking their daughters to do. They all agreed for their daughters to play. And I also told the parents, like, hey, you can also play, or if you don't want to play, you can at least observe to make sure that you're comfortable with what's happening here. So one of the girls' dads did agree to play. So I had at the time I had 4 girl players and then 1 dad. And so I would like to offer this. If you want a copy of this email, maybe you're somebody who runs a D&D club, or you're starting one for a school or a church group or a community center or a library, something like that, or just you're starting a new game and you need buy-in from players, or maybe you do have younger players and you want to make sure that their parents are okay with this. This might help you. But like I said, it's a little long, but change it, delete, add, whatever you need to do to it, but maybe it will help just kickstart some ideas for you and how to explain to people the benefits of playing D&D. So send me an email. My email's in the show notes below, and I'll send off a copy of that email to you. All right. So then after we had the buy-in from the parents, we had the list of players. I asked my daughter to find out from each of her friends what their favorite color was and what their favorite animal was. And so the animal's going to come up during the game. We'll talk about that as it comes up in the future sessions. But the color was important because my daughter and I went online, since we couldn't get to a game store that was open because they were all closed because of the lockdowns. But we went online and we bought dice for each player in their favorite color, and also little mini notebooks with the cover and the color of their favorite color. And we sent them to these players as kind of like their initiatory D&D thing that they were going to get to play the game. So that's going on. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out what system am I going to run. 5e is the current system. It was also the current system at the time. I wasn't super familiar with it. I'd played it a couple times, but I'd never run it. I wasn't really sure if that was a system that I was going to be able to be comfortable with. But I also knew I wanted to run this adventure. This is from I got this in my 1981 box set. There's a video on that up here on the right-hand corner. But this was the adventure that I started with, and I wanted to run this for my daughter. So I was looking for 5e conversions online, and I came across a video on the DUNGEONCRAFT channel by Professor Dungeon Master, where he reviewed the Goodman Games Original Adventures Reincarnated version of this that has a 5e conversion. And he gave it a very glowing review. And so I watched that and I said, okay, I guess that's what I'm going to get. I'm going to get that, and then I'm going to have to figure out how to run 5e. But then, lucky I stayed all the way through the end of that video. One of those little, video recommendations popped up at the end of his for a series on his channel called The Caves of Carnage that is essentially his version of running this campaign is sort of a more grimdark setting. And he used 5e mechanics to run it, but he did a really stripped down version. And as I was watching, I was like, I'll just do it in BX. I'm just going to use the rules that I started with. And then it's kind of a fun synergy because my daughter was going to be the same age that I was when I started playing. And we're going to use the same version of the rules that I used when I started playing. So I have a whole video on this. I linked to it earlier. This is the version of the game I wanted to use. However, I didn't want to try to find other. This is expensive, right? This is a collector's edition, collector's. At this point to get something this old, but I needed to have the rules for my players easily accessible. And at the time I couldn't find the PDFs of this. I think you can now, but at the time I couldn't. So I was lucky enough to find and kickstart this version, Old School Essentials by Necrotic Gnome. This is the exact same version of the rules that you just saw. It's just using the OGL to do it in a different layout, a new layout that's just super easy to run. I actually found things that I had missed or not really paid attention to in that other book in here. And it really helped me kind of fall in love with the system all over again. So I chose to do this. I got the PDFs with this so I could share them with the players. And then eventually I also bought this book for them. So this is the one that they use at the table if they ever need to look stuff up. It's very, very rare that they do. But if they do, it comes up, and this is the version that they use at the table. All right, so now we're going to get to session 0. So if you're an old timer like me, you might not like session 0. Some people just don't, and it's kind of a new thing. I personally think it's a great idea. I'm glad I did it for this group. But if share your pros and cons below. Tell me what you think, if you like session 0 or if you think it's completely pointless and why. But for this particular group, I thought it was super necessary. So we did this one online. And I made some notes here. So I have this notebook that I use. This is where I plan my sessions. And then I transcribe my notes into my larger GM notebook. People see that on Twitter all the time. I usually type my notes just to make it easier. But this was my session. These were my notes for session 0. So I forget my handwriting, but I'm just going to go. So I asked them, are you familiar with D&D or with role-playing? They all kind of said, no, not really. And I said, well, you've all role-played because I've seen most of you play some version of superheroes with my daughter on the playground or whatever. And that's live action role-playing. You're playing a role. You've created a character. You gave them a name. You gave them, personality and what they look like and all that kind of stuff. That's what you're going to be doing in D&D. But when you had disagreements on the playground, like, oh, I shot you with my superhero eye beams, and then someone said, no, I jumped out of the way, I didn't get hit. Well, how do you know who's right? And I talked about, well, we have numbers to show that, and we use dice. Some of the numbers are fixed, some of them are random, and the numbers are random because no matter how good or bad you are at something, everybody has a really good day or a really off day every once in a while, and that's the randomness of life, and that's what the dice are going to represent. So I talked about my role as the referee and what I do. And then I got into the dice, and I was relating this to things that the girls were learning in school at the time. So they were in 5th grade, and I knew what my daughter was learning, and all the girls were the same age roughly. So I knew they were learning about percentages and probabilities. And so I explained the dice using those percentages. And that was a way to kind of help the parents also understand, like, this is going to be educational. It's going to help your kids, right? So we talked about that. Then I started to get into the rules a little bit, and I talked about the ability scores, and I used the tomato method. I didn't come up with this. I found this online, but I love it. So the idea is like strength is crushing a tomato with your hand, how able you are to do that. Dexterity is how accurately you can throw that tomato. And constitution is if you eat a poisoned tomato, can you withstand it? And then intelligence is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, not a vegetable. Wisdom is knowing that you don't put a tomato in a fruit salad. And charisma is being able to sell somebody a fruit salad that has a tomato in it. So I used that. The girls loved it. They were laughing and coming up with their own ideas. And they really liked that. So I went through the rest of the dice, and then I got into creating characters. And I told them, like, according to these rules, what you're supposed to do is roll 3d6 and put them to your character abilities. We did 4d6 drop 1. I also told them you can pick your character class first and then arrange your scores, or you can roll and see what you get, and then maybe that'll inspire you for your class. They all decided to pick. 3 of the girls picked to play elves. In this version of the game, elf is a class, not a race. And we can talk about that later. Drop me a note below, but I also discuss it in my video when I went over the Moldvay basic system. But 3 of them, including my daughters, had to be elves. 1 decided to be a thief. And then one of the players, whose dad was playing, she said, Dad, Mr. Thomas, that's me, Mr. Thomas said that, clerics can turn undead. And I feel like she really locked onto that for some reason. She said, I feel like that might be important. And so, Dad, can you play a cleric? And he's like, yeah, sure, that's fine. So 3 elves, a thief, and a cleric. And that was the starting party for this group. So that was kind of it for this particular session. At the end, we did a quick like role play exercise where we just talked about things, but there was no dice. I just kind of said, like, this is kind of how it's going to go, and I'm going to ask you what do you want to do. And so we went through that really quickly. A few things that I would have added. I added these at the first session, but in retrospect, I should have done it at the time during the session 0, talking about their familiarity with fantasy. So for me, someone my age, I grew up with, my fantasy was Tolkien, Conan the Barbarian, King Arthur stories, mythology, and Star Wars. Okay. And superheroes, that's still fantasy, right? This group, most of them had not done anything with Tolkien. I read The Hobbit to my daughter when she was a little kid, but that was about it. Some of them hadn't even seen Star Wars, and their familiarity was Harry Potter and Avatar: The Last Airbender. So just knowing those differences and how they approach things is important, because it helped me understand their framework of what they were thinking of when I was explaining things. The other thing was things to avoid. I'm going to get into that a little bit more next time because, I'm kind of running out of time here. But it was very important for me to ask these girls, are there things that you do not want me to include? Or, how comfortable are you with descriptions of violence? Like, how graphic can I get? Because I don't want them going home, and telling their parents something bad about me and making their parents upset. But also, I don't want to give them nightmares. That's ridiculous. I want everyone to have fun. So I did ask them, what do they want to avoid during the game? And then lastly, a little thing, and I picked this up from Professional Dungeon Master's DUNGEONCRAFT channel. I asked every player to send me an email. I'm going to talk about in-game communication in a future video. But send me an email with what their character loves, what their character hates, and what their character fears. That's all been great stuff, good fodder for role-playing sessions. All right, so that's it for this particular video. So I hope you like this. Please let me know. Let me know what I can do to make it different or more enticing for people that, if you're really just here for the history. I'm really hoping that you guys will stick around for this series, because I'm very excited to talk about it as we keep going. To add to the part where what I've been doing lately. So what was I drinking while I made this session? I made a cold brew coffee old fashioned. So this is an old fashioned cocktail, spirit, sugar, water, bitters, but in place of spirit, I did cold brew coffee. I used a vanilla simple syrup that I made, and I used homemade chocolate bitters and some orange bitters. So quite delicious and kind of refreshing. And then what I was listening to while I was working on my notes was this record, Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison, 1968. This is, of course, a new copy, but a classic record. Everyone should have it in their collection if you have a vinyl collection. So that's it. I want to say thank you for watching. Happy gaming, stay safe, and I'll talk to you next time.